After 6 long years of deafening silence, my daughter-in-law, Tiffany, showed up on my porch. She didn't come alone. My son, Kevin, stood behind her, and a moving truck was backing into my driveway. "We heard you got a new lake house," she announced, her voice dripping with a sweetness I knew was poison. "We're moving in with you," she demanded, not asked. But when she pushed past me and stepped inside, the gold digger froze in her tracks. She thought she was walking into her new life. She never saw my revenge coming. Before we get into all the details of this nightmare, I want to thank you for being here. It means the world to me. Please subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. And let me know in the comments what city or even what country you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let me tell you how this all began. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one that faces the wide glass doors overlooking the lake in the Ozarks. The water was calm, mirroring the soft blue of the Missouri sky. It was the first real peace I'd felt in years, a gift from my late sister, Helen. The house was her final act of love, a sanctuary meant to heal the wounds her own family knew had been inflicted on me. Then the knock came. It wasn't the friendly rap of a neighbor or the quick thump of a delivery. It was a demanding, insistent pounding that rattled not just the door, but the tranquility I had just begun to embrace. 6 years. 6 long, quiet years since I'd heard from Kevin or his wife, Tiffany. 6 years of birthdays marked only by the silence on the other end of the phone. Holidays spent staring at an empty chair at the table. I'd stopped trying to call after the 3rd year. The silence had become a physical presence, a wall so high and thick that even my hope had finally learned to be quiet. The pounding continued, more impatient now. I set down my lukewarm tea, my hand trembling slightly, and walked to the door. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm of dread and a foolish flicker of anticipation. Who could it be? Through the peephole, I saw them, and the air left my lungs. Kevin stood a step behind his wife, looking as uncomfortable as a man wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. He had perfected that look since his marriage. But Tiffany was front and center. She wore that bright, polished one that never, ever reached her cold, calculating eyes. But it wasn't their faces that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the mountain of luggage stacked on my porch. 4 large suitcases, a tower of cardboard boxes, and a mess of duffel bags. My stomach plummeted. This wasn't a visit. This was an occupation. I opened the door slowly, my hand unsteady on the knob. "Kevin," I managed to say. "Hi, Mom." His voice was a quiet mumble, almost an apology, but his eyes were fixed on the welcome mat. He couldn't look at me. But Tiffany, however, had no such reservations. She stepped forward, that brilliant, fake smile stretching even wider. "Carol, you look wonderful," she chirped, pushing past me into my foyer without waiting for an invitation. "We heard about the new lake house. It's just perfect." Kevin followed her like a shadow, dragging their luggage behind him, the wheels rattling on my hardwood floors. I stood there, still holding the door, feeling like a spectator in a slow-motion car crash. My own home was being invaded, and I was frozen. What are you doing here?" I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper. Tiffany was already surveying my living room, her eyes scanning every piece of furniture, every painting on the wall. It was the same look she'd given my old house 12 years ago, the look of an appraiser deciding what was valuable and what was junk. "We brought our stuff to move in with you," she announced, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "We're moving in with you," she demanded, not asked. But when she pushed past me and stepped inside, the gold digger froze in her tracks. She thought she was walking into her new life. She never saw my revenge coming.
Of course, next year never came. The following 4th of July, there was another emergency, a sudden work crisis for her. The year after that, a friend's out-of-state wedding they'd forgotten to tell me about. There was always something. And each time, Kevin would call, his voice full of apology, and choose her manufactured drama over our family's longest-standing tradition. I started to see the pattern, but I kept making excuses for him, for her. She's young, I told myself. She's just stressed. She'll come around. The worst part was how she twisted things to make it seem like I was the one at fault. For Kevin's 30th birthday, the year before they got engaged, she planned an elaborate surprise party at a fancy downtown restaurant. She planned the entire thing without telling me a single detail. I, of course, showed up at their apartment with a homemade German chocolate cake, the same cake I'd baked for his birthday every single year since he was 6. I walked in to find a towering, professionally made cake already sitting on the dessert table. "Oh, Caro," Tiffany had said, her voice loud enough for all their friends to hear, "you didn't need to bring anything. I told Kevin to call you and let you know we had everything covered. Didn't he tell you?" Kevin had just stood there, looking at his shoes, a flush creeping up his neck. He never said anything. He never defended me when Tiffany made me look foolish or pushy or like I was overstepping boundaries I didn't even know existed. He just allowed her to paint me as the clingy, overbearing mother-in-law, and I, wanting to keep the peace, let it happen. That was my mistake. I let it happen. That was the first time Kevin chose her manufactured drama over our family's joy. Little did I know, it was a tactic she would perfect over the years. The memories of the wedding are still sharp, like shards of glass in my mind. That was the day I truly understood the depth of Tiffany's cruelty and what she was capable of. It should have been one of the happiest days of my life, watching my only son start his new chapter. Instead, it was the day she made it clear that in his new life, I was nothing more than an inconvenient footnote. I should have known something was wrong when I was excluded from all the planning. There was no dress shopping, no cake tasting, no visits to potential venues. When I gently asked Kevin about it, he just shrugged and said, "Tiffany wants to handle everything herself, Mom. You know how she is. Very particular about her vision." I tried to understand. I told myself that modern brides were different, more independent. I was just trying to keep the peace, as always. The morning of the wedding, I got ready with such care. I'd bought a beautiful, elegant navy blue dress, nothing too flashy, nothing that would ever outstage the bride. I even had my hair professionally styled for the first time in years. I felt a swell of pride in my chest, a deep maternal love for the man my son had become. I was so ready to celebrate him. When I arrived at the church, the usher, a young man I didn't recognize, looked at his seating chart with a flicker of confusion. Carol Carver, you said? Let me just double check." He then led me down the long aisle past the front rows reserved for Tiffany's family, their faces beaming. We passed the second and third rows, filled with their laughing friends. We kept walking all the way to the very last row. The very last row. He seated me next to a couple I had never met in my life. I sat there in the last pew and watched my son marry a woman who had intentionally seated his own mother behind a sea of strangers. I felt something inside me crack. It wasn't just hurt. It was a cold, bone-deep understanding. This wasn't an oversight. This was a message. This was Tiffany, in front of God and everyone, showing the world exactly where I ranked in their new family. I was last. After the ceremony, I tried to find Kevin to congratulate him, to hug him, but he was immediately swept away in a whirlwind of photographers and well-wishers. Every time I got close, Tiffany would magically appear, her hand on his arm guiding him away to meet some important relative of hers or to pose for another picture. She was a gatekeeper, and I was locked out. At the reception, it was even worse. I was seated at a table in the far corner of the ballroom, next to the kitchen doors. My table mates were Tiffany's elderly great-aunt who seemed to be suffering from dementia, and a distant cousin of hers who spent the entire evening complaining about her recent divorce. From across the vast room, I watched Tiffany laugh and dance with her family. I watched as Kevin gave a toast, thanking everyone who had helped make this day so special. He thanked her parents, her siblings, their friends. He never mentioned me once. I left before they cut the cake. No one noticed. No one called to see where I had gone. The final definitive cut came about a year later. I had called Kevin to see if he was okay. I hadn't heard from him in a few weeks, which was becoming the new normal. Tiffany answered his phone. "Carol," she'd said, her voice sickeningly sweet, like honey laced with arsenic, "I think it's time we were honest with each other. Your behavior has been really concerning lately. The constant calls, the guilt trips, the way you try to come between Kevin and me. It's not healthy." I was so shocked I could barely form words. I'm not trying to come between anyone. I'm just calling my son. "I think you need to take some time to work on yourself," she continued, her voice turning clinical, like a therapist diagnosing a patient. "Maybe see someone about these attachment issues. When you're ready to respect our boundaries and our marriage, we can talk about rebuilding this relationship in a healthier way." Then she hung up the phone. Hanging up that phone, a part of me shattered. Now seeing her stand in my kitchen, acting like she owned the place, I knew that broken part of me had been replaced by something else, something harder.
"This kitchen is actually pretty well equipped," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. She was opening my spice cabinet and examining the contents with a critical eye. "Though we'll need to reorganize everything. I have a system that works much better than this random arrangement you have going on." My spices were arranged alphabetically. It wasn't random, it was logical. It was my system. Kevin sat across from me at the table, his face illuminated by the blue glow of his phone. He was scrolling endlessly, lost in his own world. He'd barely said 10 words to me since they'd arrived, and when he did speak, it was only to echo whatever Tiffany had just said. Watching him now, I searched his face for any trace of the boy I'd raised, the boy who used to tell me everything, but he was gone, replaced by the silent, passive man. "So, Carol," Tiffany continued, pulling ingredients out of my refrigerator without asking, "Kevin and I were talking, and we think it would be a good idea to get this place appraised, for insurance purposes." I looked up from the glass of wine I hadn't touched. "Insurance purposes?" "Well, of course," she said, not missing a beat. "You need to make sure you have adequate coverage on a property like this, and it's always good to know what your assets are worth." She flashed that bright, empty smile again. "Property values have gone through the roof in lake areas lately. You could be sitting on a gold mine and not even know it." The way she said gold mine made something cold settle in my stomach. There was that hungry, calculating tone again, the one that always appeared when Tiffany was working an angle. "I'm not planning on selling," I said quietly. "Of course not," she laughed, a sound that was sharp and brittle. "Although you have to admit, this place is awfully big for just one person, and maintaining a lake house can be so expensive. The humidity, the constant repairs, the property taxes." She let the words hang in the air, a veiled threat. Kevin finally looked up from his phone. "What Tiffany means, Mom, is that we want to help you manage the property, take some of the burden off your shoulders." "Right. The same way Tiffany had helped me manage my relationship with my son by cutting me out of his life completely." "That's very thoughtful of you," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But I'm managing just fine." Tiffany's smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the edges. "Are you, though? I mean, no offense, but you're 62 years old. Living all alone in a big house like this, dealing with all the maintenance and upkeep, it's a lot for someone your age." Someone your age. There it was again, that condescending tone that made me feel like a fragile, confused old woman who couldn't possibly take care of herself. The same tone she used on the phone 6 years ago when she diagnosed me with attachment issues.
Every change she made felt like she was erasing a piece of me. But what she did the next morning was not just erasing a piece of me, it was a declaration of war. The next morning, I came downstairs hoping for a few quiet moments with my coffee before the invasion continued. But Tiffany was already in my living room, and what I saw made my blood run cold. She was sitting on my floor, surrounded by my precious photo albums, the visual history of my life, of my family. She had them spread out on the coffee table and was methodically sorting the pictures into two distinct piles. One pile was meat. The other was a chaotic heap. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharper than I had intended. She looked up, her face a perfect mask of innocent helpfulness. "Oh, morning, Carol. I was just helping you organize these. You have so many photos, and honestly, half of them are blurry or duplicates. I thought I'd help you sort through them and digitize the good ones. We need to clear out some of this clutter." Clutter. She called my memories clutter. I walked closer and looked at the messy heap, the discard pile. My heart sank. There was a picture of Kevin at his 5th birthday party, his face smeared with chocolate cake. A photo from our family trip to the Grand Canyon, the three of us squinting in the sun. A candid shot of my late husband Tom, laughing as he taught a 7-year-old Kevin how to fish off the old pier. All the visual evidence of our life before she came along, tossed aside like trash. "Those aren't yours to sort," I said, my voice trembling with rage I was struggling to control. I reached for the albums. She pulled them away from me, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "Carol, be reasonable. You can't keep every single photo you've ever taken. It's not healthy to live in the past. Besides, look at this one." She held up a picture of Kevin and I at his high school graduation. He was looking away from the camera, a goofy, embarrassed grin on his face, as I tried to fix his cap. "It's not even a good shot," she declared. "Kevin's not even looking at the camera." It wasn't a perfect photo, but it was one of my absolute favorites. It captured a real moment, something spontaneous and loving between a mother and her son. "That's one of my favorite pictures," I said through gritted teeth. "But why?" she asked with genuine confusion. "It's not even flattering to either of you." "Because it showed us happy together. Because it was from a time when he was still my son, before she had systematically poisoned his mind and convinced him that loving his mother was somehow a weakness." I reached for the photo again, but she held it just out of my reach. "Honestly, Carol, you need to let go. Kevin isn't a little boy anymore. Keeping all these childhood photos around is just sad." Sad? She thought my love for my son was sad? "Those are my memories," I said, low and dangerously. "And now you can focus on making new memories," she chirped, her bright smile snapping back into place, "with all of us, together." Then she casually tossed the graduation photo onto the discard pile. That's when I understood. This wasn't about organizing or decluttering. This was a systematic erasure. She was trying to eliminate any evidence of the deep bond Kevin and I once shared. She was rewriting our family history so that it began with her. I watched, frozen in horror, as she continued her work, casually discarding moments that meant the world to me. A photo of Kevin's first lost tooth. Gone. A picture of him proudly holding up a string of sunfish. Discarded. A snapshot of him asleep in my arms as a baby. Into the trash pile. "You know what?" she said, holding up another photo. "We should really get Kevin to go through these with us. Help us decide which ones are actually worth keeping." The thought of my son sitting here looking at pictures of our life together and agreeing with his wife that they weren't worth keeping made me feel physically ill. "No," I said firmly.
Tiffany looked up, surprised by my tone. "No, but those are my photos, my memories. You don't get to decide what's worth keeping." Her mask of sweetness slipped for just a second, and I saw a flash of cold, hard anger in her eyes. But then the smile was back, brighter and more artificial than ever. "Of course, they're your memories, Carol. I'm just trying to help.
But if you want to keep living in the past, she shrugged and started gathering up the photos. It's your choice. She tossed a photo of me holding Kevin on his first day of kindergarten onto the discard pile with a flick of her wrist. In that moment, I knew she wasn't just trying to redecorate my house. She was trying to rewrite my history. The next afternoon, I was trying to find a moment of peace in the garden when I heard the sound of digging. I walked around the side of the house, and my heart stopped. A day laborer Tiffany had hired was standing there with a shovel, poised over the rose bushes my late husband Tom had planted for me on our 10th anniversary. They were my most treasured possession, a living memory of our love. "What are you doing?" I cried out, rushing forward. Tiffany emerged from the house, holding a glass of iced tea, looking completely unbothered. "Oh, there you are, Carol. I'm having these old things dug up. They're riddled with black spot and they look absolutely dreadful. We need to make way for something more modern, maybe some ornamental grasses." I stared at her, then at the roses. They were in full, glorious bloom. Deep crimson, fragrant, and perfectly healthy. "They are not dreadful," I said, my voice shaking. "Tom planted these for me. They're not going anywhere." Just then, my next-door neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a kind widower in his 70s, poked his head over the fence. "Everything all right over there, Carol? Just admiring your roses. They're the talk of the neighborhood this year." Tiffany shot him a look that could curdle milk. "We're just doing a bit of landscaping, thank you," she said dismissively, then turned back to me, her voice a low hiss. "Don't make a scene in front of the neighbors." She grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the house. The laborer, looking confused, paused with his shovel in the air. "Ma'am?" he asked me, looking at me. "Just do what I told you to do," Tiffany snapped at him over her shoulder. Inside, I rounded on her. "You have no right! Those roses are all I have left of him!" Kevin walked into the room, drawn by the commotion. "What's going on?" "Your mother is being hysterical about some old plants," Tiffany said, rolling her eyes. "They're not some old plants, Kevin. They're the roses Dad granted for me, and she's having them dug up and thrown away," I pleaded with him, searching his face for a sign of the compassionate son I once knew. He looked from me to Tiffany, his expression torn. He shifted his weight, avoiding my eyes. "Mom, Tiffany just wants to help the yard look a little more updated. Maybe we can plant some new ones." "You can't replace them," I sobbed. "You can't replace memories." He just stood there, silent and useless, as Tiffany put her arm around his waist. "See, honey," she said to him as if I wasn't even there. "This is what I mean. She gets so emotional about things. It's not healthy." I felt a wave of despair so profound it almost buckled my knees. He was letting her do this. He was letting her destroy the last tangible piece of his father's love for me, and he was doing nothing. What would you do in my situation? If someone you loved stood by and let your most precious memories be destroyed, what would you say? What would you do? Let me know in the comments, because at that moment I was completely lost. I spent the rest of the afternoon in my bedroom listening to the sickening scrape of the shovel against the earth, each sound a fresh stab to my heart. By the time it was quiet, I looked out the window. There was just a patch of raw, overturned dirt where my beautiful roses had been. They were gone. Watching the shovel tear into the roots of my husband's roses felt like it was tearing into my own heart. And my son just stood there and let it happen. What I didn't know was that destroying my garden was just a test run for destroying my life. A few days later, the house felt less like a home and more like a battleground where I was silently losing every skirmish. Tiffany had systematically continued her campaign of erasure, replacing my things with hers, imposing her will on every room. I found myself retreating more and more, trying to hold on to the last vestiges of my own space. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen, staring out the window at the empty patch of dirt that used to be my rose garden, when a loud crash echoed from the living room, followed by a theatrical gasp. I rushed in, my heart pounding. Tiffany was standing there, her hand over her mouth in a perfect imitation of shock. On the floor at her feet was shattered into a dozen pieces, the antique porcelain music box my mother had given me. It was a delicate, hand-painted piece that played Claire de Lune, my mother's favorite melody. It was irreplaceable. "Oh, Carol, I am so sorry," she exclaimed, her eyes wide with fake distress. "I was just dusting the mantelpiece, and it was placed in such a precarious spot. It just slipped." I stared at the wreckage of the music box, then at the mantelpiece. It hadn't been in a precarious spot. It had sat in the exact same place for years, safe and sound. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was no accident. This was another calculated act of cruelty, another memory destroyed. "I can't believe this," I whispered, kneeling down to touch a piece of the broken porcelain. The tiny ballerina figure was snapped in half. Tiffany kneeled beside me, placing a hand on my arm. Her touch felt like a spider. "I know it's upsetting, but honestly, this is a perfect example of what I've been talking about. This house is just so cluttered with old things. It's an accident waiting to happen." She then looked at me, her expression shifting from feigned sympathy to a look of condescending concern. "You see, Carol, this is why we need to help you organize. Maybe your memory and your coordination aren't quite what they used to be. It's perfectly normal at your age. People become a little more forgetful, a little more clumsy." The accusation hung in the air, more shocking than the shattered porcelain on the floor. She wasn't just calling me clumsy. She was planting a seed, a poisonous seed. This was the first time she had openly, directly suggested that my mind was failing. It wasn't just a passing comment about my age. It was a deliberate, strategic move. She was building a case against me, piece by broken piece. I looked up at her, my grief over the music box momentarily eclipsed by a wave of cold, clear-eyed fury. I saw the flicker of triumph in her eyes before she masked it again. She wanted me to argue, to get hysterical, to prove her point. I refused to give her the satisfaction. I stood up slowly, brushing the dust from my knees. "Accidents happen, Tiffany," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Please be more careful in the future. Some things can't be replaced." I walked away, leaving her kneeling amidst the ruins of my mother's memory. I could feel her eyes on my back, surprised by my lack of an emotional outburst. She had expected tears and accusations. She had expected me to behave like a confused, emotional old woman. I was beginning to understand her game, and I would not play by her rules. The accusation hung in the air, more shocking than the shattered porcelain on the floor. She wasn't just calling me clumsy. She was planting a seed, a poisonous seed she planned to nurture until it took root in a court of law. The next evening, Kevin approached me while I was reading in the living room, or rather in the corner of the living room where Tiffany had relegated my favorite chair. He had that nervous, fidgety energy he always got when Tiffany had sent him to do her dirty work. He cleared his throat, avoiding my gaze. "Mom, can we talk for a minute?" I put my book down, my senses on high alert. "Of course, Kevin. What is it?" He sat on the edge of the ottoman, wringing his hands. It's about the house. Tiffany and I have been talking and, well, she's right. This place is a lot for you to handle on your own." He started rattling off a list, and I could tell the words weren't his own. They sounded rehearsed, like lines from a script. The maintenance, the property taxes, the insurance. It's a huge financial burden. We're worried about you. "I've told you both, I'm managing just fine," I said, keeping my voice even. "Are you, though?" he pressed, finally looking at me, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt, maybe. Or was it just fear of failing his wife's mission? Mom, one major repair, like a new roof or a septic issue, could wipe out your entire savings. You're living on a fixed income. You need to be practical. Practical. That was Tiffany's word. She used it whenever she was about to suggest something completely self-serving. What exactly are you suggesting, Kevin? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. He took a deep breath, like a diver about to plunge into icy water. We think it would be better for everyone if we made this arrangement more official. You know, legal. That way, we could officially contribute to the expenses, help with the upkeep, and take some of the burden off your shoulders. The word legal hung in the air between us like a threat. What kind of legal arrangement are you talking about? Nothing complicated, he said quickly, a little too quickly. Just maybe you could add our names to the deed as co-owners. That way, we'd all be invested in taking care of the place, and you wouldn't have to worry about all the financial responsibility falling on you. It would protect you, Mom. It's for your own good. For my own good. I stared at him, the man who was once my sweet, honest boy, now sitting in front of me and calmly suggesting I sign away a piece of my home, my security, the one thing my sister had left to protect me. The audacity of it was breathtaking. This was their endgame. This was Tiffany's idea, wasn't it? His jaw tightened, a sure sign of his defensiveness. We discussed it together. She's just trying to look out for your best interests, Mom. She's worried about your future. Tiffany's best interests, more like. I could see the whole ugly plan laid out before me as clearly as if she'd drawn me a diagram. Step 1, move in under the guise of helping an aging parent. Step 2, systematically take over, creating chaos and making me feel incompetent. Step 3, convince me to sign over partial ownership for my own protection. And once their names were on that deed, I knew I would be powerless. They could force a sale, take out a mortgage against the property, or simply push me out of my own house entirely. I need to think about it, I said, my voice a carefully controlled monotone. Of course, Kevin said, a wave of relief washing over his face. He thought he had succeeded. Just don't take too long. Tiffany says these kinds of arrangements work best when they're handled quickly, before any complications arise. Complications. What kind of complications could possibly arise from me continuing to own my own house? The threat was veiled, but it was there. Sign, or we will make things complicated. He couldn't even look me in the eye when he said it. These weren't his words. They were Tiffany's. This wasn't an offer to help. It was the next step in their plan. It was time for me to find out exactly what that plan was. The next day, Tiffany announced she was going into town to a boutique an hour away to find some decent curtains because mine were, in her words, absolutely tragic. Kevin, her ever-obedient chauffeur, went with her. The moment their car disappeared down the long gravel driveway, I sprang into action. My guilt about snooping was completely overshadowed by the primal need to protect myself. This was my home, my life, and I would not let them take it without a fight. I started with Tiffany's purse, which she had carelessly left on the kitchen counter. My hands trembled as I opened it. Her phone was tucked into a side pocket. It was locked with a passcode, of course, but as I was about to put it back, the screen lit up. A text message had just arrived. My blood ran cold as I read the preview on the lock screen. It was from a number I didn't recognize. The message said, "Any luck with the old bat yet? The clock is ticking." The old bat. That's what they were calling me. My own son's wife and whoever she was texting were referring to me as an old bat? I felt a surge of icy rage that burned away any remaining hesitation.
I quickly memorized the number and put the phone exactly where I'd found it, my heart hammering against my ribs. The clock is ticking. Ticking toward what? My next stop was Kevin's laptop bag, which he had left on the floor by the couch. I opened the laptop. To my surprise, it wasn't password protected. He'd always been careless. I went through his recent files, and my breath caught in my throat. There was a folder on his desktop labeled Mom's Estate. My hands were shaking as I clicked it open. It was a treasure trove of their malicious intent. There were downloaded articles with titles like Navigating Elder Law in Missouri, What is Financial Exploitation of a Senior, and Steps to Establishing Incompetency. There were printouts from legal websites detailing the process for gaining power of attorney over a parent. They weren't just planning to get their names on my deed. They were researching ways to have me declared legally mentally incompetent so they could take control of everything.
I felt sick to my stomach. This was premeditated. They had been planning this for a while. The sudden reappearance, the concern, the offer to help, it was all part of a cold, calculated plot. My son, my own flesh and blood, was actively researching how to strip me of my autonomy. I closed the laptop, my mind reeling. I needed more. I needed to know the full extent of their plan. I went to their bedroom, the room that used to be my peaceful guest room, now a chaotic mess of their clothes and belongings. I started with Tiffany's suitcase, the largest one. I dug through her neatly folded clothes, my hands searching for anything, a piece of paper, a notebook, anything that would give me a clue. And then I found it. Tucked between a stack of sweaters was a large manila folder. The label on it, in Tiffany's perfect, loopy handwriting, simply said, Carol. My hands were shaking as I closed the laptop. This was worse than I could have ever imagined. They didn't just want my house. They wanted to strip me of my rights, my identity. But I had a feeling the worst discovery was yet to come. I sat on the floor of my own guest bedroom, the manila folder in my lap feeling as heavy as a tombstone. With trembling fingers, I opened it. The contents confirmed my worst fears and revealed a level of treachery I could never have imagined. The first things I saw were copies of my personal documents, the same ones Tiffany had been organizing from my desk a few days earlier. My bank statements with my balances circled in red ink, my insurance policies, and most chillingly, a copy of my sister Helen's will with the paragraphs detailing my inheritance of the house highlighted in bright yellow. She had been conducting reconnaissance, assessing the value of her target. But it was the documents underneath that made my heart stop completely. These were papers I had never seen before, official-looking legal forms, partially filled out. The first was a petition for guardianship and conservatorship. My name, Carol Ann Carver, was typed neatly at the top as the incapacitated and disabled person. My son's name, Kevin Thomas Carver, was listed as the petitioner. I scanned the pages. It was a legal request to a court to strip me of my right to make my own decisions, medical, financial, and personal. They were going to argue that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. The next document was even more sinister. It was titled Assessment of Mental Capacity. It was a checklist of symptoms, and I could see faint pencil marks next to several items: memory loss, confusion, poor judgment, inability to manage finances, social isolation. They were building a fraudulent case against me, using the very isolation they had created as evidence of my decline. The broken music box, the uprooted roses, it all clicked into place. They weren't just acts of cruelty, they were pieces of manufactured evidence. At the very bottom of the folder, I found the final damning piece of evidence: a business card for a lawyer. His name was Arthur Finch,
and his specialty was printed in gold letters: Elder Care Transitions and Estate Management. This was their hired gun, the man who was going to help them legally erase me. Just then, I heard Tiffany's voice drift up from the kitchen. She must have come back early. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. I quickly but carefully put everything back in the folder, tucked it back into the suitcase exactly as I'd found it, and tiptoed out of the room, my mind racing. I crept to the top of the stairs and listened. She was on the phone, her voice low but sharp. No, he hasn't signed anything yet. He's dragging his feet. Yes, I know the deadline is approaching. Don't worry. The old bat will sign soon. I'm laying the groundwork. One way or another, we'll have access to the asset before the end of the month. I promise, we'll have your money. The asset. That's what they were to me. Not a mother, not a person, an asset. And they were in debt to someone with a deadline. This wasn't just about greed, it was about desperation. And desperate people do dangerous things. Standing there in the quiet guest room, surrounded by proof of their betrayal, I didn't feel sadness anymore. I felt a cold, hard rage. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. They were about to find out how wrong they were. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my bed, staring into the darkness, listening to the quiet murmurs of their voices from the other room. They were plotting my demise, and I was just a few feet away. But the fear I had felt earlier had been replaced by something else, a cold, crystalline clarity. I knew exactly what I had to do. I waited until 4 a.m., when the night was at its darkest and quietest. I moved through my own house like a ghost, every step silent and deliberate. I wasn't running away. I was making a strategic retreat. I was gathering my weapons for the war they had declared on me. First, I went to my study. I didn't take much, just a small locked box from the back of my closet. Inside was my grandmother's jewelry, a few precious heirlooms they hadn't found yet. More importantly, it held the original deed to the house and my birth certificate, documents I would need. I had kept them safe, away from Tiffany's prying eyes. Next, I went to the living room. I carefully took the photos Tiffany had discarded and tucked them into my bag. These weren't just pictures. They were evidence of a life she was trying to deny ever existed. They were my truth. By 5:30 a.m., I was dressed and ready. I carried a single suitcase, all I would need for now. I walked through the house one last time, my heart a strange mix of sorrow and resolve. This beautiful, peaceful place my sister had given me had been violated, but I would not let them win. I would not let them take it. I slipped out the back door, my car keys clutched in my hand. The air was cool and crisp, smelling of pine and damp earth. As I started my car, the engine turning over with a soft purr, I took one last look at the house in my rearview mirror. The windows were dark. They were sleeping, dreaming of their victory, confident in their plan. They were secure in the knowledge that they were dealing with a confused, helpless old woman who would be easy to manipulate. If you've been watching this far, thank you so much for sticking with me. It means more than you know. If you're still here, please comment with the number 1 just so I know you're on this journey with me. Okay, back to the story. They would wake up in a few hours, expecting to corner a confused old woman. They had no idea that woman was already miles away, setting in motion a plan of her own. The huntress had just become the hunted.
The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and orange as I drove. I wasn't heading for a friend's house or a relative's. I was heading into battle. And my first stop was the bank in the next town over, where I'd been a loyal customer for over 30 years.
I was waiting on the steps when the manager, a kind woman named Helen, who had helped me through my retirement planning, arrived to open up. "Carol, goodness, you're out early," she said with a warm smile. "I need your help, Helen," I said, my voice firm. "I need to build a fortress." Inside her office, I laid out the entire sordid story. I didn't cry. I didn't waver. I presented the facts calmly and clearly. I told her about the guardianship petition, the fraudulent mental assessment, the text messages. I explained their plan to gain access to my accounts. Helen's warm smile faded, replaced by a look of grim determination. "We see this more often than you can imagine," she said, her voice full of anger on my behalf. "Financial exploitation of seniors is a plague, and we have protocols to fight it." For the next hour we worked. We changed every password and security question on my accounts. We added extra layers of verification, including a specific verbal passcode that only I would know. We flagged my accounts with a high alert for any power of attorney or guardianship claims, requiring a direct, in-person verification from me and a review by the bank's legal department before any action could be taken. By the time I left, my money was locked down tighter than Fort Knox. Tiffany and Kevin would hit a brick wall of corporate policy if they tried to touch a single penny. My next stop was the county courthouse. I filed a formal report of potential elder fraud with the Adult Protective Services office located there, providing them with copies of the documents I had found. The social worker who took my case was a no-nonsense woman who listened intently, her expression growing more serious with every word. She assured me an investigation would be opened immediately. Finally, I went to see my lawyer. Not the predatory vulture whose card I'd found in Tiffany's folder, but my own attorney, a sharp young woman named Sarah, who specialized in property law and had the tenacity of a bulldog. I had hired her to handle Helen's will, and I'd been impressed with her thoroughness. I laid everything out on her conference table. She reviewed the documents, her eyes narrowing. "Your sister was smart, Carol," she said, tapping a finger on Helen's will. "She included a specific clause here. It's called an interim clause. It basically says that if anyone challenges the will or your fitness to inherit, they are automatically disinherited completely." She anticipated something like this. A wave of love and gratitude for my sister washed over me. Even from beyond the grave, Helen was protecting me. "What I want to do," I told Sarah, "is make this house untouchable, permanently." She said with a thin smile, "I have just the thing. It's called an irrevocable trust." By noon, the paperwork was drawn up and filed. The house and all the assets associated with it were transferred into the Helen Carver Memorial Trust. I was the primary beneficiary, but I was no longer the legal owner. The trust was, and the terms were ironclad. The property could not be sold or mortgaged without the approval of two co-trustees, myself and, at my request, my kind neighbor, Mr. Henderson, who had been unknowingly a witness to Tiffany's cruelty. The trust explicitly named Kevin and Tiffany as individuals who could never, under any circumstances, benefit from it. By the time the banks closed, my financial fortress was built. The house was secure. Now all that was left was the confrontation. It was time to look my son in the eye and show him the consequences of his betrayal. My phone had been buzzing all day with increasingly frantic calls and texts, first from Kevin, then from Tiffany, then from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all. I would respond on my own terms, in my own time. At 3 p.m., I sent a single, simple text message to Kevin. "Meet me at the Oakwood Diner at 5 p.m. Come alone." He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth in the back, looking haggard and pale. He had aged 10 years in the last 24 hours. For a fleeting moment, I felt a ping of pity for the lost little boy I saw in his worried eyes. But then I remembered the cold, calculated cruelty of their plan, and the pity vanished, replaced by a steely resolve. "Mom, thank God," he said, half standing as I slid into the booth opposite me. "We were so worried. You just disappeared. Tiffany thought maybe you'd had some kind of episode." An episode, of course, the narrative she was building. "Sit down, Kevin." My voice was calm, but it had an edge of steel he had never heard before. He sat down slowly, his eyes searching my face, finally realizing this wasn't going to be the tearful reunion he might have hoped for. I didn't waste time with small talk. I looked him directly in the eye. "I know what you're planning," I said simply. The color drained from his face. What do you mean?" "I mean the guardianship petition. The fraudulent mental competency evaluation. The plan to have me locked away and declared legally unable to manage my own affairs so you and your wife can gain control of my house and my money." He opened his mouth to deny it, a pathetic sputtering sound, but I held up my hand to stop him. "Don't bother lying, Kevin. I found the documents in your laptop. I saw the text messages on Tiffany's phone. I know about the lawyer. I know everything." For a long moment, he just stared at me, his mouth agape. Then, slowly, his shoulders sagged in defeat. The fight went out of him completely. "Mom, it's not what you think," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Then explain it to me," I challenged. "Explain to me how my own son could plot to have me declared incompetent." He buried his face in his hands, his body shaking with silent sobs. "We're in trouble, Mom. Bad trouble. Tiffany, she made some bad investments. She got involved with some online scheme and we lost everything. We owe people money. Dangerous people. A chill ran through me, but it wasn't from sympathy. How much money?" "More than we have. A lot more," he said, his voice muffled. "When we heard about the house, Tiffany thought if she could get control of it, we could take out a mortgage against it or even sell it to pay off the debt. So you decided to steal it from me, to have me locked away and declared mentally unfit." "That was Tiffany's idea," he said quickly, looking up at me, his eyes red and pleading. "I told her it was wrong, but she said it was the only way. She said we would be protecting you from making bad financial decisions with your new inheritance." "What bad decisions, Kevin? I've been managing my own finances perfectly well for 62 years. He couldn't meet my eyes. He looked down at the table. She said older people sometimes get confused about money, that they're easy targets for scams. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it.
"Do you really believe I'm confused, Kevin?" I asked. "Do you really think I need you to protect me from myself?" A long, heavy silence stretched between us. Then quietly, he whispered, "No. But you went along with it anyway." Tears were streaming down his face now. I didn't know what else to do. These people, Mom, they're not the kind of people you can just ignore. "Then you should have come to me honestly," I said, my voice hard as granite. "You should have come to me as a son and asked for help, instead of coming to me as a con artist trying to swindle his own mother." "Would you have helped us?" he choked out. The question hung in the air. After 6 years of silence, of being treated like I was dead to them, would I have helped them? "I don't know," I said honestly, "but you'll never find out now, will you? Because you didn't treat me like family. You treated me like a mark." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. His fingers were ice cold. "Listen to me very carefully, Kevin. The house is gone." His eyes widened in panic. "What do you mean, gone? Did you sell it?" "No," I said, pulling my hand back. "I mean, I've transferred it into an irrevocable trust. A trust that you and Tiffany can never, ever touch. Even if I die tomorrow, you will never see a single penny from that property. It is protected from you, forever." He stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. "You can't— Mom, we need that money." "No, Kevin," I said, standing up from the booth. "You needed honesty. You needed integrity. You needed to be a son. You made your choices. And the people you owe money to? That's your problem to solve, not mine."
He looked up at me, his face crumpled in desperation. What am I supposed to tell Tiffany? I looked down at the man who was my son, but was now a stranger. I felt nothing but a vast, empty space where my love for him used to be. Tell her the confused old bat just checkmated her. And then I walked out of the diner, leaving him with the ruins of the life he had chosen. 6 months passed. The silence that returned was different from the silence of the previous 6 years. It wasn't a heavy, painful silence filled with unanswered questions and longing. It was a light, peaceful silence filled with the promise of a new beginning. I sold the lake house in the Ozarks. As much as my sister had intended it to be a sanctuary, it had become tainted by their invasion. The memories were too fresh, the violation too deep. I couldn't look at the patch of dirt where my roses used to be without feeling a fresh wave of anger. So I let it go. A young family with 2 small children bought it, and the thought of their laughter filling the halls brought me a sense of peace. The money from the sale, combined with the rest of Helen's generous inheritance, gave me something I hadn't had in a long time: freedom. The freedom to go anywhere, to be anyone I wanted to be. I chose peace. I bought a small, cozy cottage on the Oregon coast, a place where the air was crisp and clean, and the sound of the ocean was a constant, soothing presence. I kept in touch with my kind neighbor, Mr. Henderson. He was the one who told me what happened after I left. He said a few weeks later, 2 very large, unfriendly-looking men had shown up at the house looking for Kevin and Tiffany. There had been a lot of shouting. The next day, he saw them packing their car in a panic. They sold most of their new furniture for pennies on the dollar and left in the middle of the night. He heard from another neighbor that they had filed for divorce shortly after. Their scheme had not only failed, but it had completely destroyed their already toxic marriage. I felt a sense of closure hearing the news, but surprisingly, not joy. There was no satisfaction in their downfall. My freedom wasn't about their failure. It was about my own survival, my own peace. I started taking long walks on the beach, collecting seashells and driftwood. I joined a book club in the small coastal town. I began to volunteer at the local library, surrounded by the quiet comfort of books, just as I had been for most of my life. I was rebuilding, not just my life, but myself. I was rediscovering the woman I was before I became a mother, before my identity became entangled with someone else's. I was rediscovering Carol. I spent my evenings on my small deck, wrapped in a warm blanket, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The pain of my son's betrayal had started to fade, replaced by a quiet acceptance. I was learning to be alone again, and to my surprise, I was learning to like it. I was finally at peace. I thought my story was over, that this quiet, solitary life was my final chapter. But the universe, it seems, had one more surprise in store for me. One phone call was about to change everything. One evening, as I was watching the waves crash against the shore, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, with a different area code. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but some strange intuition, made me answer it. Hello? A tentative voice, young and hesitant, answered on the other end. Is this Terrell Carver? Yes, it is, I said. Who is this? There was a pause, and then the voice said, so quietly I could barely hear it, My name is Emily. I'm Kevin's daughter. My granddaughter. The child I had never been allowed to meet. The child whose existence had been kept from me like a state secret. I had only ever seen a single baby picture of her years ago on a social media post I wasn't supposed to see. My hand flew to my mouth and I had to sit down on the deck chair, my legs suddenly weak. Emily! I breathed her name, the sound foreign on my tongue. She found your number in my dad's old phone, she continued, her voice gaining a little more confidence. He doesn't know I'm calling. I hope that's okay. I wanted to talk to you. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of emotion so powerful it almost overwhelmed me.
It was a mix of shock, grief for the lost years, and a tiny, fragile spark of hope. "Oh, honey," I said, my voice thick with unshed tears, "it's more than okay. I'd like that very much." We talked for over an hour. This granddaughter I had never met, this stranger who was my own blood, somehow found me anyway. She told me she was 15. She told me about her school, her friends, and her passion for art. She asked me about my life, about the cottage by the ocean, and about what it was like to start over at my age.
"My parents are getting divorced," she said quietly after a while. "Dad told me everything about the house, about what they did. He said he was so wrong to cut you out of our lives. He cries about it sometimes." I didn't know what to say to that. The wound was still there, a scar on my heart, but hearing this from her felt like a soothing balm. "I know I'm young," she said, her voice filled with a maturity beyond her years, "but I'm old enough to make my own decisions about who I want in my life, and I want to know my grandmother." The tears I had been holding back finally fell, silent tears that traced paths down my cheeks. "I want to know you too, Emily," I whispered. "More than you know." When we finally hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness, the phone clutched in my hand, and I smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. Tiffany had tried to destroy my relationship with my son, and she had succeeded in turning him into someone I barely recognized. But she had failed in her ultimate goal. She had failed to destroy me. I was free now, truly free. Free from the weight of their expectations, free from the pain of their rejection, and free from the fear of their manipulations. And in trying to take everything from me, they had inadvertently given me the greatest gift imaginable, a second chance. A chance to build a new relationship, a real relationship, with a part of my family I never thought I'd know. My family wasn't gone. It was just beginning, on my own terms. This entire ordeal taught me that you can't always choose your family, but you can, and you must, choose to protect your own peace and your own heart. What about you? Have you ever had to make a tough choice to stand up for yourself against the very people who were supposed to love you the most? Please share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you for listening to mine. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the hardest of times.